All right, I'm going to put myself on mute.
Sounds good. Janine, go ahead and give Gary keyboard and mouse control.
Done.
Great, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. And I've already
Good.
begun
Yes.
the recording, so whenever you're ready to start, you have control.
All right. I just made Maria an organizer,
Yes.
so she can answer questions on her own.
All right.
All right.
I'm going to go ahead and just mute.
Okay.
All right.
All right, Gary, whenever you're ready to start.
Okay. I believe that Janine needs to be the person. Oh, no, that's not true. It's the start button up top here.
Yes.
I can do. All right. I want to start. Now I want to start the broadcast.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Hey, this is Gary Socolow, Florida DOT, and this is the session 4 of our webinars on the Florida Transportation Site Impact Handbook. This is on Chapter 3, Local Government Comprehensive Plan Reviews, and I am hoping that you can hear me, and I'm going to make sure of that. If you can hear me and hear me well, yes, raise your hand. That's the way to go. All right, good, excellent. So I'm actually getting there. All right, thank you so much. I appreciate it. So hey, like I said, my name's Gary Socolow. I'm going to be the host today. The reason I'm the host is definitely not an expert on this chapter. This is our 4th webinar in the series on the 2014 Transportation Site Impact Handbook. In this webinar, we will go over Chapter 3 of the Impact Handbook. This chapter is called Local Government Comprehensive Plan Reviews. And the major focus today will be the changes and the nature of DOT's review of local government comprehensive plans as they relate to transportation. And what I would like to do here is to ask Janine to give me keyboard and mouse control so I can go to the next slide. Okay, good, good. Thank you, Janine. Here with us today, group of people that if you've been with us before, you're well aware of some of us. We are all people that helped rewrite this handbook over the last few years, and we're here to go over the major changes and also answer as many questions as we can as possible. I am Gary Sokolow, like I said, Andrew Young, Gina Bognani from the Florida DOT are here, as well as Maria Cahill from our Policy Planning Office and our growth management expert and champion on our floor. We also have Janine Fear, who has been involved with transportation issues and growth management for years, working with the old Department of Community Affairs, which is now known as the Department of Economic Opportunity Community Planning section, now working with CDM Smith to provide her expertise to us in the field of transportation and growth management. We got Nathan Hicks here, who always helps put the presentations together, and will be helping to answer your questions. We do not all have formal speaking parts, but we all have experience with different aspects of impact analysis. For example, Gina is our level of service expert. I have dealt mostly with site impact and access management, so we all bring something different to the table. So as you ask your questions, we are all available to help you with our specific knowledge. Okay. There are a number of questions that have always come up when we do this and other presentations. We'd like to answer those right now. At the end of the presentation, give us a few days and we can get you a complete copy of the presentation materials and other things that we have discussed. Currently, if you look at your panel for GoToWebinar, you'll see something that says handouts 1 of 5, and we do actually have a printout of the today's webinar that you can actually get right now if you want, but we will be sending you that plus other summary materials afterwards. We're offering credits for the American Planning Association, and the number you see next to CM credits, you will want to use that number in order to make your job easier to get those credits for the American Planning Association for your AICP. The PDH credits, right there, the PDH credits for professional engineers are also available through the proof of attendance, which is, I've sent a certified list of attendees with all the necessary information for the new honors system that they use for getting credits for your professional engineering. Each of our presentations will be made into a recording, and we will try to have this done as soon as possible, but editing the video takes a bit more time than putting together a copy of our presentation. But we'll show you where we have the videos posted and where you can see other webinars that you might have missed. Since this is a webinar, you will be muted. However, you can ask questions in a tabbed dialog box, as I will shortly demonstrate. Please ask your questions as they come up, and we'll try to get to them as quickly as possible. We also have some times that we've specified to answer questions also. I am sure that there will be questions that we cannot answer immediately or of a philosophical nature that we may never be able to answer. These will just have to have discussions at a later time. There may be questions that come up that we can't get to also, and what we will do in that case is to provide a question and answer paper that will be available after the presentation. There is a lot of new information in this particular chapter. I want you to know that we may need to answer some of those questions later and follow through by email, like I just said. If we go long on this presentation, if it looks like the questions are such that we really need to answer them online while we're here, and the information is such that we really need to go over all of it, we may even have to make this chapter into 2 sessions and have this next session in September. Okay. With that, I just want to let you know that even though there's lots of material, we are not trying to cover everything. I'm going to briefly discuss how you can participate in today's webinar by clicking on the orange arrow right there. You can open and close the control panel. From the View menu, you can also set the control panel not to auto-hide. That's what I like. I don't like it disappearing on me because I have trouble finding it. From the audio pane here, it provides you with all the audio information you need, and by default you've entered by speakers, but if you click audio setup, you will see that you have the option of coming in on a telephone, especially if your internet is slow. And if you do enter by telephone and would like to talk, then enter the audio pin, not 72, but the one you'll get when you sign in. If you have a question, this is where you enter it, and we'll get to it as soon as possible. You can also raise your hand if you would like to personally speak, whether you had something to add, because I'm going to make the assumption here that there are some of you that know quite a bit about this, and if you would like to add to it and raise your hand, we can unmute you so you can speak and teach us some things too. All right, and the website to go to get to our Site Impact Handbook is FDOT transportationimpacthandbook.com, and all you do is click on the icon of the cover, and I want to ask you who you represent before we go any further. If you don't mind, I'm going to poll you on this to see who we have out there. And very good. Okay. Very good. I am going to close the poll in just a moment. About 90% of you have voted, and I'm going to share that information with you. And as you can tell, most of you are with local or regional governments. The next biggest group are consulting firms. and Florida DOT is in there. I'm really pleased to know that there is interest outside of Florida DOT for this DOT handbook. All right. All you need to do is right mouse click the handbook and download it, and this is what you'll find. It's kind of nice. It has a table of contents that makes it easier to go to places in the handbook directly. The number system in this is such that the cover is page 1, which means that wherever you go in the handbook, if you're familiar with Acrobat, the pages will always match. Okay, I'd like to also ask you now, how many of the past 4 webinars have you attended? I'm going to launch that, and okay. Well, this is a fast group. Okay, thank you. So with that, I'm going to share, and almost the half of you have attended all of the webinars so far, 3, and there's some that this is your first one, and I hope that you get enough information out of this that you can go back and listen to the others. And that's one of the things I'm going to talk about in a few slides. A warning that at the bottom of each page, we've said that things are changing all the time. What we have tried to do in this handbook is provide multiple live links that should keep you informed of the latest changes. From the last webinar, we discussed transportation modeling and some of the benefits of large-scale regional modeling versus working with the kind of traffic projections that you use the Institute of Transportation Engineers, or ITE, trip generation manual. I'm going to go through in these next few slides because you will get this presentation with the live links. And this is how you can go to the Access Management Site Impact YouTube channel and see some of these presentations. This one was on trip generation, and this one was on the basics of what goes into a impact plan, and this is the general overview of all the chapters that was done a few months back. With that, I'd like to ask if there are questions right now, and it doesn't look like we have any, so what I'd like to do is go immediately now to Janine Fear, who will take over, and Janine is going to do the rest of the presentation here. She's from CDM Smith, and as I said, a major editor of this handbook. And with that, I'm going to ask Janine that she take away my keyboard and mouse control so she can take over completely, and I can sit back.
All right, I've done that. Hello everyone, my name is Janine Fear, and today what I'm going to do is walk you through the Chapter 3 of the Transportation Site Impact Handbook. And I'm also, while going over the chapter, going to go over all the legislative changes that occurred this summer that basically impact certain portions of this handbook as well. Chapter 3 goes over several topics in regard to growth management and transportation planning, as you can see on the slide before you. What we'll cover today is several sections that are found within Chapter 3, and they'll be appearing on screen as I talk. Basically, Chapter 3 goes over comprehensive plans and comprehensive plan reviews. It will also go over the statutory requirements for which impact not only the elements but how comprehensive plan amendments are developed and looked over. And we'll also look at different types of comprehensive plan amendments that you'll see, as well as concurrency alternatives. So, Chapter 3 is set up to first provide guidance. Chapter 3 is first set up to provide guidance regarding comprehensive plan amendments and concurrency alternatives. Each section within Chapter 3 provides a brief introduction of those concepts for specific topics, and then gives more additional detail to help reviewers as well as interested parties to understand different topics like sector plans, rural land stewardship area, things like that. Within each section of Chapter 3, you're going to find several hyperlinks that Gary was talking about. Those hyperlinks are there for you to help as an additional learning aid, just in case you have additional specific questions regarding certain topics. Now, at the end of Chapter 3, you're going to notice that there are several resource guides. These resource guides are available to you as additional aids as well to help you understand certain topics. In regards to legal authority, for example, what is the legal authority to look over future land use map amendments? What is the legal authority to look at concurrent transportation concurrence, things like that? Resource guides also talk about different online resources available through FDOT and DEO regarding a plan amendment review. And finally, we have a checklist to go over what's called future land use map amendments. Now, what you see before you is an example of the checklist for the future land use map amendment resource guide. I'm just showing you this as an example of what type of things you'll find at the back end of this chapter. You can see on the slide for the checklist, it first talks about whether you look at whether the amendment correctly identifies the study area as well as what type of impact this amendment might have. We will assess further in the presentation regarding future land use map amendments, what they are, and what elements they impact. Are there any questions in regards to the overall setup of Chapter 3 or what we're about to go over today?
Janine, this is Gary Sokolow. I've seen no questions on the material yet, but a few people have noticed that your microphone is cutting in and out, and I have two suggestions that I've known in the past of, I don't know if your smartphone is near you and on. Sometimes, believe it or not, it causes interference. And the other is if you turn off your cell phone, your smartphone, and it doesn't get any better, we might ask you to call back in. So let's see how that goes.
All right, I'll do that right now.
Okay, thank you.
Moving forward, we're going to tackle the first section of the handbook, underneath Chapter 3, which is a general introduction into comprehensive plans and plan amendments. Now, you might want to know what a comprehensive plan is. Comprehensive plans are framework documents which provide goals, objectives, policies which reflect the vision of a local government. Each local government within the state of Florida is required to have a comprehensive plan.
Janine,
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. It's still breaking up a little bit. Would you perhaps be able to call back in?
I'll give it a shot.
All right, thank you.
If you're using hands-free and just speaking into the audio microphone built into your phone, that might be causing a problem also. That speaking from the regular hand cradle might be more a better connection. While Janine is doing that, this is Gary Sokolow. I think I can talk a little bit about this slide because, like many of you, I lived through this. I'm with Florida DOT. We were doing lots of training on growth management and had gotten out there, created lots of good guidance, lots of good training, and then 2011 came. There was a series, this is when the land planning agency was still called the Department of Community Affairs, but they came around the state and did a lot of teaching sessions, and most of you, I understand that in 2011, what we did is we stepped back from as much control as we had over DOT over local governments and the concurrency issues, and that we were told to refocus on the important state resources. Now I'm going to let Janine come back in, and appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary, and I apologize for being a little absent right there. How do I sound right now before I begin?
It's still cutting a little bit. Are you using the speakerphone system? It may be better to use the cradle of the phone itself.
Yeah. How do I sound now?
Keep talking, please.
Test, 1, 2, 3.
I believe it's a little better.
A little better? Okay.
Yes.
Let's give this a shot.
Great.
I can understand you well.
Yay, score.
All right, thank you, Janine.
All right.
All right, so before technology attacked me, I was just briefly going over what a comprehensive plan was, and I noticed when I came back in, Gary was giving all of you a little bit of a brief history of what has occurred around 2011. And just what happened was, prior to 2011, we had what was called the Growth Management Act. After 2011, we saw massive changes to this Growth Management Act, and it was named the Florida's Community Planning Act. Part of the changes to this act was the restructuring of the state agency's role in regards to growth management, in particular for us, transportation planning. And I apologize. I'm going to try calling back in on my cell phone to see if that sounds better.
I am going to ask a question while she's calling back in. This is Gary Sokolow again. 2007 through 2010, when we created the last Impact Handbook, our section did a series of training sessions of two and a half days on transportation and growth management. And if you attended any of those sessions, be they in Fort Lauderdale, I think we did one in Destin, we did another one in Jacksonville, Fort Lauderdale, and also Tampa and Sarasota. If you could raise your hand if you were at any of those. All right. I could see the organizer of all of those just raised his hand. Thank you, John. Okay. I see we do have some, we definitely have some veterans of the 2011 here, and I appreciate it.
This is test 3.
Sounds really good.
That is much better.
Awesome.
Great.
So I guess it wasn't your smartphone causing the problems.
Oh, smartphones beat office phones apparently any day.
All right.
So let's get back to comprehensive plan. So I was just briefly saying what has happened with 2011. In regards to what comprehensive plans do, they give a vision for a local government, usually between 10 to 20 years. Now, some comprehensive plans could have multiple planning timeframes, and that could depend on various pieces of the elements within the plan having different planning horizons. Like, for example, sector plans, which we will talk about later in this presentation, usually have different planning time horizons than the actual comprehensive plan they're adopted into. Some can have planning horizons for 50 years. One or two, I remember off the top of my head, actually have planning horizons for 100 years. So these are documents that are generally trying to understand what the community wants and what the community sees itself into the future. In general, there is a bare minimum of 8 major elements for inland counties in their comprehensive plans and 9 major elements for coastal counties. And that's because there's an extra element called coastal management element required for counties that are along the coast. All elements within a comprehensive plan are required by state law to be internally consistent with each other, as well as consistent with specific statutes identified in the handbook under Chapter 163, Part 2, Florida statute. Now, of the major elements that I was just generally talking about, we're going to hit upon 3 throughout this entire presentation. That is the future land use element, the transportation element, and the capital improvement element. Now, as Gary was alluding to earlier, prior to 2011, the State Land Planning Agency, which was the Administrative Growth Management for the state, was known as the Department of Community Affairs. After 2011, the Department of Community Affairs became part of what is now the Department of Economic Opportunity. So when I refer to State Land Planning Agency, that's the Department of Economic Opportunity. They are now the ones that administer growth management for the state of Florida. So for the rest of this presentation, in terms of the State Land Planning Agency, I'm going to refer to them as DEO. Now, DEO is not the only state agency that is involved with growth management. There are others such as FDOT that's also involved. And FDOT is involved from the transportation planning side of it. under Section 163-3184 Florida statute, it defines all of those agencies, such as FDOT, that would be coordinating with DEO in terms of comprehensive planning. FDOT has a published procedure number 525-010-101-D, that covers the review of comprehensive plans for FDOT staff. Now, this procedure identifies areas of focus for DOT comprehensive plan reviewers, as well as identifies coordination and submission procedures for DOT reviewers in regards to working with DEO on comprehensive plan amendments. Currently, this procedure is going through revisions to update it to the current growth management legislative changes that are going through right now, well, that have been adopted. Section 3.2 of this handbook then goes into the comprehensive plan amendment process. Now, I've been using the word amendment pretty freely throughout this presentation so far. In order for a comprehensive plan to change, you have to amend the plan. Comprehensive plans were never meant to be static documents. In order for a comprehensive plan to be amended, you have to go through the comprehensive plan amendment process, which is a state review process for comprehensive plan amendments. Now, prior to 2011, there were only two ways in which a comprehensive plan was reviewed by the state. One is what I'll call the regular comprehensive plan amendment review process. And another, which we'll go into a little detail later, that is not very big on our radar, is the small-scale comprehensive plan amendment review. After 2011, the regular comprehensive plan amendment review was taken out of statute and replaced by two new processes: expedited state review and a state coordinated review. And so now you notice that we have three amendment review processes for comprehensive plan amendments in the state. So it might get confusing. Which one is applicable to the amendment that you're looking at? We'll start off with looking at state coordinated review. State coordinated review, and I'll go into this a little bit more detail on its why later on, is the most reminiscent of the original comprehensive plan review process prior to 2011. And it's really intended for plan amendments that can have significant impact on important state resources and facilities, in terms of an amendment for one city impacting several neighboring cities, to impacting regional resources, or even impacting the state. So currently, there are 6 types of comprehensive plan amendments that would go underneath the state coordinated review process. Plan amendments such as those are in areas of critical state concern. Areas of critical state concern are those areas designated to protect important state resources, just like the Big Cypress in Collier County, or Green Swamp in Lake and Polk counties. You also have to do this for rural land stewardship areas. These are also areas that we'll go into later on are for massive planning, long-range planning. These are areas that are typically 10,000 acres or more. Another is sector plans. And sector plans is kind of like a new kid on the block. And we'll talk more in detail about them later on in this presentation. A new thing that you'll see on the end of this, number 3, is or an amendment to an existing sector plan. In 2015, it was added that if you amend a sector plan that is in a comprehensive plan, it must also go underneath state coordinated review. Another thing which is kind of new is development of regional impact. Now, I'm using the term development of regional impact because that's a term that everyone on this call most likely recognize. Now, really how it's phrased that within the statute right now is development that could qualify as developments of regional impact, because the review process for developments of regional impact has changed in the 2015 legislative session. We'll talk more about this later, but I just want to bring this up to you guys right now. Another type of amendment that would go under state coordinated review would be changes to the comprehensive plan from an evaluation and appraisal review. These changes are usually pretty massive changes that change sometimes the entire scope of a comprehensive plan. And we'll go over that later in regards to what kind of things that could change to a comprehensive plan because of an evaluation and appraisal review. And finally, if a new municipality popped up in Florida, they have to make a new comprehensive plan as required by statute, and that would also go underneath the state coordinated review process. Now, the other two review processes mentioned, expedited state review and small scale. With expedited state review, basically anything that is not identified as small scale or state coordinated review falls underneath expedited state review. And the small scale amendments are those amendments that are typically 10 acres or less. And there's usually a cap of 120 acres per local government. We'll go into these in a little bit. Now let's talk about expedited state review process. This is a very new review process since 2011. So what is it? Local governments must submit their proposed amendments to DEO and other reviewing agencies, including DOT. Once the proposed amendment package is considered complete by DEO, a clock begins, and all reviewing agencies have 30 days to submit their comments to the local government. Now, it's a little different for agencies such as DOT, DEP, and what have you, because not only are they submitting their comments to local governments, they're also submitting their comments to DEO. So just keep in mind of that. But like I said, they have to have their comments into the local government 30 days after receipt by DEO of the proposed comprehensive plan amendment. Once the local government receives what's called comment letters from the state agencies, they must look at the comment letters and determine how to fix their amendment in response to the comment letters. Now let me take a step back because I realized I didn't define what a comment letter is until now. So during the 30 days in which DEO and the other reviewing agencies are reviewing the proposed amendments, they have to develop what's called a comment letter. Now, the comment letter doesn't always have to identify issues. A comment letter could be what's called sometimes a clearance letter, in which it identifies no issues with the comprehensive plan amendment. But every agency who are reviewing the amendment must submit a comment letter whether or not they have issues to the local government within 30 days. After receiving comment letters, the local government must then address any comments that are raised, particularly those that have anything to do with compliance. And now when I'm talking about compliance, I'm talking about any issues raised that have a legal authority within Florida statute that must be addressed by the local government to ensure that it's still compliant with state laws. Because comment letters can be can have two types of comments. Ones that are for compliance and others that are for technical assistance, like helping a government clarify policies to make it easier to read or things like that. After the local government addresses comments, they must submit their adopted amendment that address the comments submitted by the local, submitted by state agencies to DEO and those reviewing agencies that submitted comments. Then within, then within 30 days of receipt, DEO must determine if the adopted comprehensive plan amendment is compliant with state law. If it is, then the amendment will get what's called a notice of intent, and it's considered effective 30 days after receipt by DEO. No, 31 days. My apologies. Now, a problem can come up if a local government does not comply with all the comments, particularly comments that are of the issue of state compliance. If a local government does not comply with those type of comments, DEO can challenge the adopted amendment. Two things can happen when DEO challenges the amendment. One thing is that the local government will come back, enter into a compliance agreement with DEO, and produce what's called a remedial amendment that will address those comments that they did not address during their adoption process earlier. Another thing that could happen is that the local government could just withdraw the amendment completely and just start over. Now, with state coordinated review, as I mentioned earlier, it is the most similar to the original comprehensive review process that we had prior to 2011. And that is a bit different than expedited state review process. Now, instead of just only 30 days for review for everything to occur, we have a 60-day time frame. And that's within that 60-day time frame, FDOT and other reviewing agencies have 30 days to submit their review comments to DEO, not to local government, to DEO. Then DEO will take the comments from reviewing agencies and as well their own comments and create what's called an objections, recommendations, and comments report. The purpose of the objections, recommendations, and comments, or ORC report, is similar to that of the comment letter in expedited state review, and that is supposed to relate to the local government issues of compliance, how to rectify those issues, as well as any other technical guidance comments identified by the reviewers. Now, the only difference between, one of the main differences between the ORC report and a comment letter is the rigorous review behind the ORC report. Since, as I discussed earlier, these are typically for amendments that would have greater impact on state resources. And for example, for amendments that would have greater impact on state resources, I was talking a second about sector plans. Sector plans are underneath state coordinated review process. At minimum, sector plans are about 15,000 acres. We have one sector plan that just was adopted this year, the Bay-Walton sector plan, which covers more than 110,000 acres. So these are pretty massive, which is why they're underneath the state coordinated review, and which is why it's such a more rigorous review process as compared to the expedited. Now, the adoption process is very similar between expedited and state reviews, except where expedited state review has a 30-day review of the adopted amendment, there's 45 days for state coordinated review. The next and final amendment review process that I mentioned was a small-scale amendment process. Now, reviewers may not usually see this one. This is primarily between DEO and the local government. Small-scale amendments are those amendments that are typically 10 acres or less, unless they're in an area that's called a rural. Unless they're in an area that's designated as a rural area opportunity, which was the previous rural areas of critical economic concern, or RACIC areas. They're underneath the READY program, which is Rural and Economic Development Initiative program. Small-scale amendments are not allowed in areas of critical state concern, going back to the fact that they do protect state resources and they're underneath the state coordinated review process. As I mentioned earlier, small-scale amendment process has small-scale amendments. You can have a cap of 120 acres per year for local governments. The biggest difference between small-scale as compared to state coordinated and expedited is the fact there's no comment letters or reports associated with the small-scale amendment process. All that happens is that once the government adopts the small-scale amendment, it's submitted to DEO after having at least one public meeting. Now, in regard to all this review, everyone has a stake, everyone has a role during the review process. After 2011, as I identified earlier, there were changes to Section 163-3184, which defines and designates the roles of reviewing agencies. In particular, for FDOT, the role that it has in terms of reviewing comprehensive plan amendments for transportation planning is they must focus on what's called transportation resources and facilities of state importance. That means comments during either state coordinated or expedited review from FDOT reviewers must focus on any resource or facility that's considered of state importance. Now, this term is not defined in statute. This was intended not to be defined in statute, but intended for the state agencies themselves to identify what resources were of critical importance to the state. So for FDOT, those resources that are underneath transportation resources and facilities of state importance are defined under procedure number 525-010-101-B. That is the comprehensive plan review procedure I identified earlier. That procedure identifies that those facilities that fall underneath this category for FDOT reviewers are those facilities designated underneath the National Highway System, NHS, the State Highway System, SHS, and the Strategic Intermodal System, or SIS. That means that DOT reviewers can raise comments in regards to impacts to these facilities. Those comments could affect compliance determination on comprehensive plan amendments. That means if a local government does not address a comment addressed to one of these types of facilities, that could warrant a challenge by DEO on that adopted comprehensive plan amendment. I'm going to stop for a second. Does anyone have any questions in regards to transportation resources and facilities of state importance? Because it is technically a new term coming in from 2011.
Janine, this is Gary Sokolow, and yeah, it is a new term. And what I would like to ask you is, who determines which transportation facilities or services are truly of state importance?
Well,
you didn't think I was going to ask you an easy question.
Oh, I knew that.
I can probably help Janine a bit, if you'd like.
Go for it, Maria.
Well, when we developed the procedure, we went through a process of working with our partners on that and internally within FDOT. And the procedure talks about those facilities that are most important. But the statute also directs that for local governments who maintain their concurrency system, they should be addressing the impact of plan amendments, specifically on the strategic intermodal system, which is the highest priority network of the department and of our partners. Those are the facilities that carry the most volume of traffic. So if you're looking at a level of priority, the strategic intermodal system is probably the highest level. But at the national level, the national highway system also has been defined as having a very higher priority in its function as well. And then the last tier would be those portions of the state highway system that are not either on the national highway system or on the strategic intermodal system. There may be some adverse impacts from the plan amendments that should also be addressed under the plan amendment process. For resources, we had a little bit of a difficulty defining transportation resources, but there we were looking at the state right-of-way, where you may not have actual infrastructure in place yet, but the right-of-way is being protected for future infrastructure. And so there's an opportunity for FDOT to also ask local governments to address the impacts to state rights of way. And those are also covered under the procedure.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? If there's no other questions, I'm going to move on.
I got another question that came in, and that is there has been for those of people that aren't as up to date on it, they wanted to know the status of developments of regional impact. Somebody online said that they heard a rumor they were going away. Could you address that?
That's a trying to figure out the best way of phrasing that, because I guess in essence you could say they are, but they're not. You still have what's called Section 380.06, which guides what qualifies as development of regional impact and how they should be developed. But the review process has been changed. And that's where I was getting at earlier, is the fact that, and this will probably be discussed in more detail when we talk about Chapter 4 in another webinar, but the review process for developments of regional impact has changed, is now underneath the comprehensive plan amendment process with state coordinated review. And that in the past, there was a set review process underneath Section 380.06. And that allowed, after review, that the local government adopted the development of regional impact by local development order. And now it's adopted in comprehensive plan. So, but to answer the question, it's an odd question. It's not to say it's an odd question. It's a hard question to answer because it's a yes or no. Would you agree, Maria, or am I barking up the wrong tree? Or not?
Sometimes it takes a while to figure out how to unmute yourself to answer a question. But the answer, that I've heard from you and some people, and I really posed that not so much directly from me, but for the people that might not have been following it as closely since 2011, and that is, between all the exemptions that are in the law and the dense urban land area definition, a lot of the DRIs that we used to have gone into the mode of trying to renegotiate their impacts and renegotiate their mitigation. And
right.
yeah.
And so I see what you're saying. All right, for existing developments of regional impact, I'll start calling them DRIs. A lot of them are going through what Gary is alluding to, the notice of proposed changes, or NOPCs, to revise themselves. Some have been waiting it out to see what was going on with the DRI program itself. The change that I'm talking about with the review applies to new DRIs. So, and again, that goes back to the yes or no. What also Gary's talking about is you can call the shrinking of the DRI program, because over the last 5 years, numerous exemptions have popped up for DRIs. There's exemptions tied to what's called dense urban land areas, which we would get into in Chapter 4. And there's also exemptions tied to non-dense urban land areas. And those are more in terms of infill development, downtown revitalization, and things like that. There's also exemptions depending on the type of development, whether it's sports stadium, movie theater, certain types of retail, things like that. And there's certain types of developments within comprehensive plan that would be excluded, like, for example, the rural land stewardship area overlay, which we'll talk about later on in this presentation. Those are exempt from the DRI program. So, yes, there's a lot of exemptions that basically force the DRI program into more rural areas, as well as there is now a change in how the process is done. So the DRI program is still around, DRIs are still around, but how the program was back before 2011, it's radically different. And I hope that answers the question, or at least gives some food for thought.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
And I think just following up with what Janine said, so in working with DEO, I think they're working on coming out with some guidance, but basically existing DRIs, they continue to be amended through the existing process if the developer wants to retain his DRI. Now, there are provisions in the statute that they can abandon their DRI, or if they're substantially built out, they can, again, get out of the DRI process. But if they want to retain their DRI development order, existing DRIs, they go through the 380 process, the former process. If it's a type of development that would qualify as a DRI, it's not exempt under DULAs, so exemptions continue. If they're exempt under DULAs, which are the dense urban land areas, or if they're a type of development that's exempt, they don't have to go through the DRI process, and they don't have to go through the new coordinated agency review process. But if it's a new development that meets the thresholds for DRI outside the dense land urban areas, they would have to come in through coordinated agency review. One question that came up routinely was if the development did not need a land use change because the land uses were already in place, even if it was a DRI scale development, would it have to come in through coordinated agency review? And we were somewhat surprised that initially DEO has said that yes, any development that qualifies as a DRI that would have to undergo coordinated agency review, even if the underlying land uses were in place. And again, I want to caution you all that these interpretations, because it's a new provision of statute, could change a bit with time and could be refined. But as long as it wasn't previously exempt from DRI review, it now has to go through this new process that Janine was describing, coordinated agency review. So it's somewhat complicated, as she said, and we'll see how these interpretations change over time.
Thank you so much. Is there any other questions before we move forward? Okay. I'm going to move forward, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the review process before I switch gears. And it's in regards to a change that happened after 2011. So prior to 2011, when local governments wanted to amend their comprehensive plans, they can only do so twice per year. So only 2 times a year, whenever they want to do it during that year. They could send in a proposed plan amendment and go through the original comprehensive plan amendment process. After 2011, the cap on the number of proposed comprehensive plan amendments that could come in for state review was lifted to as many as a local government may want to do. This can be great except for one thing. There's also now a requirement that says that if you do not adopt the proposed amendment that you proposed after 100 days of, let me restart that. If you do not adopt the proposed comprehensive plan amendment after you received the comment letter or report on that amendment, after 180 days, that amendment is withdrawn. So what I'm saying is, say you have a comprehensive plan amendment you made earlier in the year. You submitted it to DAO and the other reviewing agencies, got their comment. Now you must address their comment. From the time which you receive the comments from state agencies, you have 180 days not only to address their comments, but also to hold a public meeting to adopt your revised comprehensive plan amendment. If you do not do that during that time frame, your amendment is considered withdrawn and the local government will have to start over. Now, it's not all doom and gloom in regards to this. Say your local government, you had a massive comprehensive plan amendment, and you realize there is no way you're going to be able to finish all of this within 180 days. You can contact DAO and work out an agreement with them that will extend your time frame to a later date so you can get your comprehensive plan amendment in. So my advice to, as Gary noted, there's some local governments on the line, that if you're working on a comprehensive plan amendment and you feel like you don't have enough time to do it to adequate justice to address all the comments, then coordinate with DAO to go set up an agreement to set it to extend your date, because you don't want to work on a comprehensive plan amendment, not get done correctly, and then get a challenge later on, and then have to go through the chaos with remedial amendment compliance or even just withdrawing the amendment. Now, talking about the comprehensive plan amendment review process, we're going to move now into the actual review of comprehensive plan amendment. Now, there's basically 2 types of comprehensive plan amendments. There are what's called future land use maps, or FLUM amendments, and there's text amendments. And just to tell you quickly, a text amendment is basically an amendment to the goals, objectives, and policies within a comprehensive plan, while future land use amendment is amending the future land use map or map series associated with a comprehensive plan. Under Section 163, 3177, 6A, if you want to be a bit more specific, Florida state law requires that all local governments have to adopt a future land use map or map series. The future land use map or map series contains the vision for future development within a jurisdiction. So when a future land use map amendment comes in, it changes that vision for a particular area within a jurisdiction. and that can have impact on transportation facilities. For example, if you're changing an area from agricultural use to commercial use, you're going to generate potentially more trips. So things like that have to be digested and understood for their impact and see how, if any, mitigation needs to be done in those types of contexts. Now, when a local government submits a future land use map amendment, they have to do several things before it can even cross the threshold being transmitted to state for state review. There's 3 minimum data analysis requirements. An analysis of the availability of facilities and services that includes transportation facilities, that includes water, that includes wastewater, basically all availability of public facilities and services for development that might be needed by development. There also has to be an analysis of suitability. Suitability analysis looks at the character of undeveloped lands, soils, topography, natural resources, and historic resources of the area that is being impacted by the future land use map amendment. And third, the future land use map amendment must identify the minimum amount of land needed for the map amendment to occur as determined by the local government. Some submission examples you might see for a future land use map amendment may include proposed changes, as I talked about with text changes, proposed changes to goals, objectives, and policies. For example, say you're doing a future land use map amendment, but you must change the goals, objectives, and policies which control the called a future land use designation. I'm going to take a step back now. The future land use map shows what's called future land use designations or categories, and those are the land uses that are projected to guide development within a jurisdiction. So a text amendment, in terms of submission examples, could be revising that designation to add a new activity to it, to change the density of it, to change the intensity of it. Submission examples may also include a description of a proposed new change, basically describing a study area, describing the location as you see on this list as well. And another example is the transportation data analysis. Now, when a reviewer is looking at the transportation data analysis associated with a future land use map amendment, they're looking at several things. In terms of the future land use designation itself that's associated with the amendment, they're looking at the density and intensity, like floor area ratio and pervious surface ratio, as well as on this list, the number of dwelling units per acre. This is just, again, an idea of what kind of transportation impacts will be generated by increased traffic on roadways because of the change of future land use. The reviewer is also looking for internal consistency. They're making sure that the future land use map amendment is consistent with not only the comprehensive plan, but also state law. And in terms of transportation data analysis, you're making sure it's consistent with whatever identified transportation improvements are within the comprehensive plan. You're making sure that it would be consistent with level service, transportation concurrency. So there are several things you have to look at. There's several moving pieces within the transportation data analysis stuff to look at when you're dealing with the future land use map amendment. And in terms of the transportation improvements, you have to look at the transportation element and capital improvements element, because those will list certain roadway projects that could or could not deal with the impacts that you're seeing within the comprehensive plan amendment. Speaking of level of service, as you see the title of this slide, statewide level of service standards and advisory. Review and enforcement of level of service has changed since 2011. During the time concurrency was being revised in state law back then, Rules 9J5 and 9J11 Florida Administrative Codes, which provide additional guidance requirements regarding growth management, were repealed. and portions added to Chapter 163, Part 204 statute. Now, during this time, a year later, another administrative rule was repealed, and that was Rule 14-94, Florida Administrative Code. Rule 14-94 contained a statewide minimum level of service standards for the state system, and also provided enforcement authority to FDOT in regards to level of service standards on the state. With the repeal of this rule, that enforcement authority goes away. Now, however, the impact of this repeal removes the Department of Level Service Authority in regards to the state system. There are still local governments that still use the level of service standards that are recommended by FDOT. So when we're saying advisory, what we're actually saying is that even though the enforcement authority for FDOT to enforce level of service standards on a statewide system is gone, they can still recommend that those standards be used. And those standards are found in FDOT procedure number 525-000-006E. And in essence, those standards are level service D for urbanized areas and level service B for everything outside of urban areas. And even though these are just advisory, there are still several local governments that still use these recommended level service standards. Now, it's important to note that these level service standards only impact roadways. There is no level service standard within that procedure that's identified for bicycle, pedestrian, and other modes. Is there a question in regards to this, or?
Janine, I'd like to clarify. I think the procedure that FDOT adopted has also been repealed, and we have a policy that replaced. I think our policy is still in place that adopts D and C. And I also wanted to make another note that local governments are still required under 163 to adopt level of service standards. What was repealed is the state mandated standards so that locals can develop what standards they believe are adequate for their jurisdiction. The other point that I think is important to make, and that is under the intergovernmental coordination element requirements, locals are required to coordinate with the entity that maintains the facility when they're establishing the standards. So for state roads, that would be the state DOT, of course. So they're advisory. We would recommend those in reviews for state facilities, but there's flexibility for locals in working with the maintaining agency on developing those standards. I kind of see this as similar to if you were working with a private water utility in establishing the standard for water, public water, you would work with that utility in establishing that standard. And the same should apply in working with FDOT for establishing standards on the state highway system. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or points to be raised?
Yeah, this is Gary Socolow, and just letting people know that currently the Department of Transportation is going through a study on how to better initiate and implement complete streets on the state highway system. And the area of highway level of service has come up a few times in our discussions, and I believe that you will see possibly recommendations from this group that talk about expanding level of service standards to different modes and sometimes making the highway level of service less important than other levels of service or other measures of effectiveness. We have not officially done that yet, but I just thought I'd let people know that this might be on the horizon, that we are definitely aware that our level of service standards only covers the highway mode, and that some people feel there is a need to broaden our perspective.
There is also a level of service guidebook, and Andrew may want to touch upon that because it does attempt to begin to address bicycle, pedestrian, and transit somewhat. But again, as Gary said, there's a lot of work being done currently to move us toward complete streets, more performance measures. So you should see a lot of work in the next year or so in this area.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you both. Any more comments or questions? All right, I'm going to move forward. I'm going to briefly talk about text amendments. I've already alluded to what text amendments were in another slide, but again, text amendments are those amendments that change goals, objectives, and policies within the comprehensive plan. The guidance for review of those text amendments is dependent on what portion of the comprehensive plan they're changing. To be found in section 153, 30, 177 of the Florida statute. The review procedures that you'll find for text amendments are going to be similar to FLUM amendments, and also they need to be internally consistent, not only with themselves and within the comprehensive plan, but also with state laws. Now, as I said, you could have text amendments associated with FLUM amendments. You can also have text amendments that are not associated with a FLUM amendment, so they can stand alone. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about future land use amendments in terms of future land use elements. Now, section 163, 3177, 6A establishes the requirement local governments have long-term future land use designations and those policies that support those designations. One of the most significant things in regards to future land use that would be something for the viewers to look at in regards to density and intensity is urban sprawl. Now, when I was talking about the data analysis required for a future land use map amendment earlier, I was talking about things such as suitability and availability of public facilities and services. During those analyses, it's required that they have to identify that the future land use map amendment is not encouraging urban sprawl. That means they have to discourage urban sprawl. Within the statute itself, there's a list of 13 sprawl indicators. And the sprawl indicators basically generally describe what's sometimes called leapfrog development, in which you have low density development that relatively far away from existing infrastructure facilities, way out there. It's not connected to existing roadways. And generally, they're poor development patterns that can be costly for the local government and for the state in terms of resources and other issues. What a future land use map amendment should show is at least 4 of the 8 of what's called non-sprawl indicators. Non-sprawl indicators basically show that the plan amendment would promote efficient and cost-effective provision or extension of public infrastructure and services, promotes multimodal transportation systems like promoting pedestrian, bicycle, and transit are available, promoting the conservation of water and energy, preserving natural resources, basically placing development in its most appropriate place and using it effectively. Now, amendments can also impact what's called the transportation element. As I indicated earlier in this presentation, we were going to touch on 3 elements. This is one of the 3 elements, and arguably one of the most important for FDOT, which is the transportation element. Transportation element is guided by Section 153, 31776D of the Florida statute. The element is required to address mobility issues in relationship to the size and character of a local government. The purpose of the transportation element is to plan for a multimodal transportation system that puts emphasis on public transportation systems where feasible. And that will include, within that element, addressing existing and projected level of service for the transportation system, its needs, its efficiencies, and how to encourage multimodal transportation. The element must be coordinated with any applicable MPO in the area, transportation authorities, and FDOT plans like the work program or the Florida Transportation Plan. Now, within the statute, there's some minor differences for what's required in a transportation element for local government and what needs to be looked at during the review of a plan amendment which impacts the transportation element. And that will depend on whether or not the local government is associated with an MPO, and in some cases, of a certain population size. If a local government has all or part of its jurisdiction within an MPO, it has to have a stronger emphasis on multimodal transportation, including addressing traffic circulation, mass transit, ports where located, aviation, and other related facilities. Now, for areas that are outside of an MPO, or for areas with lower population that less than 50,000, they can address multimodal transportation systems as they can. Now, during the review of a transportation element transportation element in the plan amendments that could impact it, local government I apologize, reviewers should be cognizant of whether the local government is associated with MPO or non-MPO, or what the size of local government is. Well, reviewers should also be cognizant of the level of service standards that are adopted within the comprehensive plan for all modes that are identified for the local government. They should also look at multimodal strategies that are associated with what I was talking about within the statute, as well as right-of-way provisions and other mode requirements. And again, I'm going to keep harping on this, but the element and any amendments to that element must be internally consistent with the future land use amendment and all other applicable elements of the comprehensive plan. And last, not least of the elements that we'll talk about before diving into additional comprehensive plan amendment type is the capital improvements element. And I'm just going to go over this pretty briefly. Capital improvements element is guided by Section 160.31.77.3 and identifies the timing, funding, and funding mechanisms for capital improvements, including transportation improvements for jurisdiction. Many reviewers and local governments know that within this element you have what's called a 5-year schedule. That 5-year schedule identifies capital improvements that will be completed within a 5-year time frame. In the past, local governments had to submit these 5-year schedules to DEO to determine whether or not they were financially feasible. That requirement in 2011 was removed. So just to let you know if you haven't found that out yet. And in addition, the capital improvements element must be internally consistent with transportation elements in any applicable MPO plan. Do we have any questions about the element before I move forward to transportation concurrency related amendments? Okay. Now, transportation.
I have a question here. I have a couple of questions. What happens when a transportation corridor or system does not have sufficient capacity to accommodate the impacts of a proposed development? Of course, that is the $30 million question, which fits into the, Mikael's question also, and that was about when it's not feasible to widen a roadway.
I can try to answer that, Gary, if you like.
Sure, yeah.
Well, I think the local government has several options, and typically those options are defined under the plan. They can adjust the development proposal that's coming forward. They can seek to refine the standards adopted for the corridor. Say they want to move toward more of a complete street corridor. They may take several actions to lower speeds, change standards. There are a variety of improvements they can make to accommodate other modes of travel on the corridor. They can have the developer contribute toward the improvements. So if they keep concurrency, there are going to be a number of options within the concurrency management system. But there are a number of other things that they can do, working to revisit land uses, revisit their strategy for level of service, and other things.
I have nothing else to add to that.
All right. Well, sorry, Janine. I'm just going to make a quick comment. We are running a little bit over the time. We're going to try and wrap this up in about 15 or 20 minutes, just to let everyone know how much time, how much longer we're going to run over. But with that, I'm just going to go ahead and turn this back over to Janine.
Thank you, Nathan. All right. Well, let's discuss the transportation concurrency-related amendments. As you all know, transportation concurrency is no longer mandatory underneath state law. And if local governments choose to do so, they can rescind concurrency. I'd like to point out that this option is out there, but there's still a significant amount of local governments that still have transportation concurrency. And there's some local governments that don't. And those local governments that don't have alternative systems, like for example, Pasco County and Duval County have replaced their concurrency systems with a mobility fee system, which we will talk about that mobility fee system and other alternatives when we have the Chapter 5 webinar. For local governments that do keep transportation concurrency and have any amendments related to that, they have to follow Section 163-3180 of the Florida statute. And there's several things they have to look at in regards to transportation concurrency, as seen on the slide before you. They have to make sure they have the goals, objectives, and policies that correctly implement their transportation concurrency system. They have to have professionally acceptable methods for level service analysis and identification of facilities that meet those standards. They also have to allow applicants to satisfy concurrency requirements by entering into agreements for funding construction of improvements. They have to develop policies and other mitigation techniques to address negative impacts from development, as well as develop tools and techniques to complement the application of transportation concurrency within their jurisdiction. Now, in the past, before 2011, there were several types of transportation concurrency alternative systems that were within the statute. That was transportation concurrency exception areas, transportation concurrency management areas, multimodal transportation districts, and long-term concurrency management systems. These are not within the Florida statute any longer. They were removed around 2011. But there are many local governments that still have these systems and may want to continue to use these systems, and they are more than welcome to do so. There is an additional transportation concurrency alternative that local governments may use in regards to transportation deficiencies that is now available since 2011. And we'll go over this on our Chapter 5 webinar that will be, I think, on October 29th.
And mobility fees are authorized now as an alternative.
Thank you for adding that, Maria. All right. Now we're going into the last biggie portion of this presentation, and that's other local government comprehensive plan types. That's evaluation and appraisal review, which I mentioned earlier, as well as developments that qualifies as DRI, sector planning, rural land stewardship areas, as well as other planning innovations, which we'll touch upon at the end of this presentation. Now, many of you may remember what was called the Evaluation and Appraisal Report, or EAR, prior to 2011. It was a beast of an amendment process. Originally, local governments had a list within the Florida statutes of things to go over in their comprehensive plans every 7 years to make sure they were compliant with state law. That usually took maybe a year or two of doing the data analysis, submitting the actual report itself, and then going through and creating what's called year-based amendments based on that data analysis. Things have changed since 2011. Now it is the evaluation and appraisal review. Now, the scheduling for an evaluation and appraisal review is still the same. It is still every 7 years, and it is guided by Rule 73C-49 of Florida Administrative Code. Now, what's different is the documentation. Previously, when local governments had to do the evaluation and appraisal report, or EAR, they had to do a full-blown report, and it was data analysis and everything. And that served as your data analysis for your, what was the EAR-based amendments that came from that report. And what that report basically did was it went over the entire comprehensive plan whenever were changes were going to occur within the comprehensive plan, either because of state law, compliance, or the local government wanted to change their community vision. Now, when your time is up on the 7-year schedule for your local government, the local government just has to send a letter of notification or notification letter to DEO or DEO. In that notification letter, it could be just one page identifying whether or not they will go forward and make what's called year-based amendments that will revise your comprehensive plan. Or they may just identify in that letter they will not do that, that they're compliant with state laws. The letter just has to identify whether or not they are compliant with state law and whether or not they were going forward and doing their year-based amendments. The letter could be 1 or 2 pages. Some local governments decide to go through and do the entire report, so they just get the data analysis done with. But it must be noted that when a local government indicates to DEO that they will be doing year-based amendments, they must submit those amendments within 1 year after submitting their notification letter to DEO. Now, the prohibition that's associated with years, slightly different, but in some ways the same. If a local government does not submit this letter of notification about whether or not they're doing their year-based amendments, by the time the schedule comes up for them, they'll be unable to amend their comprehensive plan until they submit that letter. And there's a similar prohibition in regards also to year-based amendments. So please, when you're dealing with year-based amendments, adhere to the timelines that are within statute, so you're not prohibited from changing anything with your comprehensive plan. And I'd like to point out real quick before I leave the year, prior to 2011, there was guidance on what local governments should look at in regards to looking at the comprehensive plan for state compliance, as well as changing their vision and what have you. All of that guidance now has been removed from the Florida statute. So it's up to the local government to decide whether or not they are compliant with state law. Now, if a local government decides incorrectly whether or not they're compliant with state law and they submit a comprehensive plan amendment that's not in compliance because of their comprehensive plan, that's on the local government to try to fix that issue. Now, I'm going to skip this slide, really. I'm just going to touch upon it very quickly. I only want to generally talk about developments of regional impact, and essentially those developments that would qualify to be a DRI, as we discussed it earlier in the presentation. And the changes came because of Senate Bill 1216 this year, which basically changed what new DRIs, how they would be reviewed and what process they would go through. So I'm just going to skip over this right now, and we'll talk more about it for the Chapter 4 webinar, since we also discussed a little bit earlier. And I'm going to jump into sector plans. All right. Sector plans are the new big kid in the block, if you consider that. You may have heard of sector plans such as Divisional, Latchwell, or Plum Creek, Sugar Hill, Bay Walton, and others. The majority of sector plans that you know about today have been developed and approved after 2011. So where did this program come from? Originally, it was a pilot program that was begun in 1998, which produced the state's 4 original sector plans. The grandfather in all was Horizon West. Now, in 2011, the pilot status for this program was moved by House Bill 7207, and it became a full-fledged program which anyone could do a sector plan underneath. Currently, there are 12 sector plans in existence or under development, of which 6 of those sector plans came in for state review in the last 2 years. One of which is an expansion of an existing sector plan that was called the West Bay Sector Plan. It is now called the Bay Walton Sector Plan, and it covers 2 counties, which goes to show how big these sector plans can be. And I'd like to point out that it is over 110,000 acres, and this is currently the 2nd largest. Another one that's under development called the North Grand Sector Plan, I think will be over 170,000 acres. So they're pretty large. The intent of the sector plan program was to provide an alternative to the DRI program. It was to encourage long-range planning and the conservation of natural resources. To be eligible for a sector plan program, kind of like getting on a roller coaster. You have to be of a certain height. For sector plans, you have to be of a certain size. Eligibility, you have to be at least 15,000 acres. And you could be within one jurisdiction or, like Bay Walton, across multiple jurisdictions. Guidance and designation for sector plans is administered through DEO under Section 163.3245 of the Florida statute. Now, sector plans can be created one of two ways. There is what I would call a regular method. That regular method, and we'll get into the components of sector plans in a little bit, consists of the local government creating what's called a long-term master plan, which is one of two components of a sector plan. After they develop a long-term master plan, that goes through state review underneath the state coordinated review process and must be adopted into the local government's comprehensive plan. Or if it crosses multiple jurisdictions, all counties or cities impacted by the sector plan. That is the regular method. Another method that was existed for those that had large future land use map amendments that adhered to the criteria, including the size eligibility of a sector plan, were allowed to become sector plans in 2011, and those are called future land use map conversions. Essentially what happened is when the sector plan program left its pilot status, the state wanted to give those who had a incredibly large future land use map amendments that could technically be underneath the sector plan program the ability to make those future land use map amendments sector plans. And only 3 were done. That was, as you see on the slide, the East Nassau Community Plan. There's also Rodina and Hendry County. That was another example of conversion. And I cannot recall the third off the top of my head right now. But since then, you don't see FLUM conversions very much. You mostly see sector plans going the regular method. Now, as I alluded to, there's 2 major components of a sector plan. One is called a long-term master plan, the other called the detail-specific area plan. The long-term master plan is considered the overarching framework for the entire sector plan. That piece is adopted into the comprehensive plan itself. It provides all the overarching goals, objectives, policies, location maps, everything. What detail-specific area plans, or DSAPs, do is they implement the long-term master plan. These are 1,000 acres or more, and they basically implement portions of the sector plan, and they're adopted by a local development order. Since there's 2 main components of the sector plan there are 2 levels of review. As we were just talking about, the first level of review would be the state coordinated review for the long-term master plan itself. When reviewers are looking at the long-term master plan, they need to be looking at the requirements underneath Section 163, 3245-3A of the Florida statute, which details what should be contained within a long-term master plan. And that includes not only the goals, objectives, policies, but also data analysis. The other level of review is when you get to the DSAP stage. DSAP, their requirements and review are found underneath Section 163, 3245-3F. Now, a change for a DSAP that happened this year is the review of a DSAP. Prior to 2015, the review of the DSAP was primarily through DEO, and DEO to coordinate with other state agencies, but DEO was the only one to review a approved local development order for a DSAP and
Actually,
determine whether or not.
Janine,
Sorry.
that was one of the changes in statute this year, is that
Yeah,
all the
that's what
commenting agencies.
Yeah,
So, okay.
I was just sorry about that. I was just talking about what was prior to 2015. I didn't mean to confuse. I'm sorry, Maria. So essentially, prior to 2015, it was DAO looking at the DSAP as the approved local development order and checking to ensure that it was consistent with the long-term master plan. As Maria was about to talk about, with changes in Senate Bill 1216 for the summer of 2015, we now have a 30-day review period for reviewing agencies in regards to DSAP. And this is a little different because instead of reviewing DAO, reviewing at the adopt local development order stage, when an applicant develops a proposed DSAP, they are required now to send their proposed DSAP application for review by reviewing agencies. That will include FDOT. So FDOT now has the ability underneath Florida statute to review a proposed DSAP and submit comments. And they must submit comments directly to local government within 30 days of receipt of the proposed DSAP. After that happens, the applicant must address the comments identified during the 30-day review period in their development of their final proposed DSAP application, which would then go to local government for approval. At that stage, it then goes back to what was happening originally prior to 2015, in which DAO would then be the recipient of the approved local development order, and what then they will review to see if it adheres to the long-term master plan, goals, objectives, policies, as well as internal consistency with the plan itself, like other state laws. And so,
If I can add a comment here, Janine.
sure.
When we're reviewing the DSAP, we're limited to the review for consistency against the long-term master plan. And since the purpose of the sector plan is to replace the DRI process, one of the issues of concern to FDOT will be to look at those extra-jurisdictional impacts to important state resources and facilities. So under the sector plan legislation, the requirements at the long-term master plan are fairly general. So the mitigation does not really happen until the detailed specific area plan is done. What's required at the long-term master plan is to generally identify the facilities and services needed to support the long-term master plan, and the sector plan needs to have procedures for working with and addressing those extra jurisdictional impacts. So it's critical that the long-term master plan establish a good set of procedures to work through and identify a process to work with the agencies to address those extra jurisdictional impacts, because again, the mitigation is not really required until you prepare the DSAP.
Thank you, Maria. And actually, before I leave this part, does anyone have questions on sector plans really quick? I'm going to jump and talk briefly then about rural land stewardship areas. This is another big program under growth management, which began in 2001. And this program was revised with House Bill 7207 in 2011 and was finally given its own guiding statute, which is section 153-3248. Now, rural land stewardship areas are intended for predominantly rural areas for long-range planning purposes. For an area to be eligible to become a rural land stewardship area, it has to be at least 10,000 acres or more outside of any urban areas or any urban service areas. It must be designated by a plan amendment as an overlay. And just as a note, similar to sector plans, rural land stewardship areas can cross more than one county. Now, sector plan, no, my apologies. Rural land stewardship areas, the overlay amendment itself is initiated by the landowners and must be submitted for state review underneath the state coordinated review process. Now, currently, there's only 2 counties within the state of Florida that has rural land stewardship areas. That's Collier County and St. Lucie County. So what would an RLSA comprehensive plan amendment consist of? It consists of 3 major things. Criteria for designated stewardship receiving areas, SRAs, and stewardship sending areas, or SSAs. Now, SSAs and SRAs are being used here to guide development to more appropriate places while protecting agricultural lands and activities, as well as other traditional rural land uses in the natural environment itself. The plan amendment itself will also contain innovative planning and development strategies and associated implementation processes regarding the functional land uses and other stewardship functions. The plan amendment would consist of a mixture of densities which would discourage urban sprawl and protect natural resources. In total, this comprehensive plan amendment is supposed to promote rural land stewardship areas and protect the rural lands, as well as stimulate economic growth and diversification of the economy. Now, the slide before you, you're going to see is an example of an RLSA map from Collier County. And as I identified previously on the slide, there are some main components of an RLSA. There's the SRAs, SSAs, and what's called setting area stewardship credits, which are associated with the SSAs. So, as I said, these credits are obtained from SSAs, which enable development to occur in SRAs. And these credits are determined by a credit worksheet that's developed by the local government. Now, you're looking on your screen, you're noticing that the SRA here is Ave Maria. You notice that seems to be incredibly urbanized compared to the other sending areas. So this is showing how, this map is showing how Collier County is protecting these other areas for natural resources and agricultural uses and placing urban uses in a more appropriate area to allow for the economy to continue on without being detrimented by fracturing or what have you. And on the bottom of this slide, you'll see it when you get a handout for this presentation, is a link to Collier County's example that I'm showing on the screen. Now, another example from Collier County, as I was just alluding to, is the stewardship credit worksheet. And this worksheet tells the applicant basically what kind of credits you could get for what type of areas they're spending development from for density and intensity purposes. And this is an example of a study area. You have to do a significant amount of data analysis, especially with a rural land stewardship area, and that is detailed in the handbook. And one of the things is basically making note of the natural resources that you'll be looking at in terms of developing your stewardship spending areas. Finally, I will end on section 3.9.5 of chapter 3. And that is planning innovation. So in House Bill 7207 in 2011, section 163.31.68 got encouraged and updated. Within this section, the legislature wanted to promote innovative planning tools and also required DAO to coordinate with agencies to provide technical assistance to local governments that are trying to use these innovative planning tools. Innovative planning tools identified by the statute include but are not limited to visioning, sector planning, and rural land stewardship area designations. Other planning innovations that you, examples that might be you can see now in terms of coordination, such as the FDOT multimodal mobility review planning guide and FDOT multimodal transportation best practices and model elements.
I will mention we're doing a series of training sessions that combine the mobility review guide training with the multimodal transportation best practices training, and working with Gary, we'll put a notice out to you all on the availability of future trainings on those topics. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Maria. And the trainings that we have done in the past on this, we have the materials available on it, and we will get you links to those, and got a lot of good reviews on the training that Maria just talked about. So stay in touch.
So for those that are still with us, do you have any questions of what we covered today?
Gary, are we able to unmute the lines in case folks want to ask questions?
Yes, we can. If there is somebody who's raised their hand, let's say, and would like to speak, yes, we can unmute them. If if they put in their PIN or if they have a working microphone. But I don't see anybody with their hands up. Is somebody asked to talk? Okay.
I think there was a question about whether we could provide access to the level of service policy and the guidebook.
Yeah, let me state that I put those in the handouts, which people can download right from their current panels that they have.
And there is some guidance there for bike, ped, and transit.
Well, not in the LOS policy.
But in the guidebook.
In the guidebook, it's not really guidance on what LOS we should use, but there is guidance on how to measure and determine and plan for. So, yeah. But what you have available, for those of you that haven't downloaded it, is our current LOS policy, the handout from today, and I also included FDOT's Complete Streets Policy Initiative Policy Statement. And we will, in our summary to this, get you links to all the things that Janine, Maria, and I have spoken about today. If there are no other questions, Janine, could you go to page 70, to slide 70? Okay, these are the remaining chapters that we have planned. So we have one in September and one in October. You have already signed up for it. So Janine, if you would go at this point to slide 73. Okay, what you have here are all the people that you can get in touch with any questions that weren't answered today or weren't answered to your satisfaction. You can bother us. So we're all here, and I would like to thank you. I'm looking to see if we had any more questions. Okay. Very good. Where are the presentations saved so we can review what we had to miss? We will, in our summary to everybody who has signed up for the class, not just those of you who attended, we will have links to the recorded session as well as to the presentation. So you should be able to give this to your coworkers that weren't able to make it or had to leave sooner. So with that, I would like to thank our main speakers today, Janine Fear and Maria, for helping us out. And thank you for your interest in the subject. And with that, since there are no more questions, have a great rest of your day, and we'll hopefully see you next month. Thank you very much. I will end, or actually, Janine, I think you have to hit the X.
I will do that as soon as I find it.